Big smiles, and we are live. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mishnah Mastery with me, your host, Rabbi Nick. And we are very excited because tonight we are going to be starting a brand new Seder. Brand new and negligence and all those kinds of exciting legal issues, which I did such a bad job of learning when I was at university. But let's see how we do with the Mishnah instead. So let's get it up on the screen for you guys so that you can follow along. And we want to go to here. And we want to go to here. Everybody is able to see that, I should hope.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So let's get underway then, as best we can, with Masechet Bava Kamma, which means the first gate. We're going to see 3 Masechtas in a row: Bava Kamma, Bava Metzia, and Bava Basra. 10 chapters in each. And once upon a time, it was one enormous combined Masechta with 30 chapters in it, and then it got divided up into the Bava Kamma, which is the first gate, Bava Metzia, which is the middle gate, and Bava Basra, which is the last gate. So we are dealing with Bava Kamma first of all. And in Perek Aleph, the first chapter, we are going to be talking about damage. And in Mishnah Aleph, we're going to be talking about the 4 primary forms of damage, the 4 primary categories. Arba Avot Nazikin. The 4 headlines from which all of the different damage payments will be learned. So here we go. Says the Mishnah, Arba Avos Nazikin, there are 4 primary categories of damage, and they are as follows: Hashor, Vahabor, Vahamave, Vahahever. So shor is an ox, and we'll see that means that in the normal course of traveling, an animal does damage, an ox does damage. Vahabor, which is a pit. Vahamave, which is gonna be discussed, but it's basically something eating something and causing damage or loss to it. And Vahahever, which is fire. So we're going to see a little bit of a comparison as to why each of these categories is unique. So the Mishnah says, Lo hare hashor kahare hamaveh. The category of ox is not similar to the category of maveh, even though both might cause damage by eating. We're going to see that there is a different kind of damage that is being done by these 2 primary categories. Velo ze vazeh, and these 2 categories, sheyesh bahen ruach hayim, have a living spirit within them, which is causing the damage. They are not similar to kahare ha'esh, which is not similar to Eish, she'ein bo ruach chayim, which does not have a living spirit, which is causing the damage. Velo ze vazeh, and all these 3 categories, shedarkan leilech lahazek, whose natural way is to cause damage as they move about, kahari habor, is not like a pit, she'ein darko leilech lahazek, which is stationary and yet causes damage. So hatzad hashavet shabahen, the common thread between all of these different categories, shedarkan lahazik ushmirasan alecha, they are prone to cause damage, and therefore you as the owner, you as the primary guardian, have the responsibility to ensure, you are the safeguarding officer. You have the responsibility to ensure that they are not going to cause damage to people. And if they do, says the Mishnah, and if they do cause damage, if they do cause damage, then you as the owner or the person responsible are going to be obligated to pay a restitution for the damage, and it's going to cost you. You're going to have to use the best quality land, and all of your best. If it comes to having to sell your land to be able to finance it, then you're going to have to use your best quality assets to be able to compensate the victim that has been damaged by your negligence, essentially. Mishnah base. So Mishnah base is going to tell us that even though you may have only contributed a small part to the total damage, you are still going to be chayev, you're still going to be obligated to pay the full amount. So the Mishnah says, Kol shechavti b'shmirasa, with regards to anything which I have incurred liability on account of it, Kol shechavti b'shmirasa, anything which I am responsible for safeguarding, hichsharti es nizkar, I am preparing the way for the damage to occur. So if it's even partially my responsibility, even if this thing has only partially done the damage, if I have bared any responsibility at all, then I have paved the way for this damage to occur. If I've paved the way for part of the damage to be caused, then I'm going to be obligated to pay damages as if I had facilitated the entire damage. So let's give an example of this. So what we see as we learn through the Gemara is that if a person digs a pit, it has to be a particular depth before it becomes your responsibility to pay for damages. So if it was just like a little divot in the road, it might not necessarily come under your responsibility. But if you've dug a large pit and someone has fallen in, then it's going to be your responsibility. But let's say, and the measurement that is given is 10 amot. So 10 tefachim. So if a pit is 10 tefachim deep and it's yours and it causes damage, you are going to incur the liability for compensation. But let's say there was a 9 tefachim deep pit, and you come along and you dig out one extra tefach. So now it's 10 tefachim, but you've only kind of been responsible for one tefach of that depth. You are still going to need to pay the full amount of damages, because even if you only contribute a little bit, if that damage is caused by reaching the threshold in accordance with halacha, then you're going to be responsible for all of that damage. Says the Mishnah, Nechasim she'ein bahem me'ilah, if it's property, if it's assets that do not have a connection to the Beis Hamikdash, such that if you misused it, you would not be chayev on me'ilah. Nechasim shel b'nei beris, if it's property that belongs to a Jew. Nechasim hamyuchadim, if it is assets, if it is property which is owned by someone, it has a particular affiliation to someone, it's not ownerless, then uvachom makom, and in any instance, if it's a public domain or a private domain, and it is if it's whether it's private or whether it's public, but the exclusion would be something which is jointly owned, then if the damage occurs, so in each of these categories, if damage is caused, then the owner is going to be chayev to pay for the compensation with the best quality assets and the best quality land. Mishnah Gimel. If we can turn my page. Mishnah Gimel. So, Shum Kesef. You have to assess the damage and make a monetary assessment as to what needs to be compensated. V'shave kesef, or you can pay with things which are worth money, such as land. Bifnei Beis Din, it has to be done before a court by a competent Beis Din. Va'alpi Eidim, it has to be done by appropriate. It has to be brought about on account of valid testimony by B'nai Chorin, B'nai Bris, by people who are free and people who are Jewish. V'hanashim bichlal hanezek, and women can be included in this process in the same way as men. V'hanizak v'hamazik b'tashlumin, and both the victim and the person liable for the damages will be involved with the payment. Sometimes both parties can end up losing money. If only half damages are expected, then the victim's going to lose out on half, and the not the perpetrator, but the owner, let's say, is going to only have to pay half. So sometimes you never know which way it's going to go. And finally, Mishnah Daled, to finish off the first chapter for this evening, the Mishnah tells us, Chamisha tamin v'chamisha muadin. There are 5 things which could be done by an animal and remain in the status of a tam, which is kind of the simple, says innocuous there on the screen, but what it means is that its status is as a kind of just ordinary animal, b'chamisha muadin, and there are 5 damage-causing acts for which the status of this animal could be converted to a muad, which is a dangerous, accident-prone or injury-prone animal, which will have different implications and different applications of the extent to which damages have to be compensated. So typically we might say that a shor hamuad is an ox which has gored 3 times, which has caused damage 3 times within a certain amount of time, and for which it's clear that the owner is incapable of taking care of it, incapable of taking responsibility for it, and this animal is too dangerous to be kept around. But otherwise, until that status changes, the status of the animal will remain as a tam. But that being said, the Mishnah is telling us that there are going to be 5 types of acts, 5 types of damage-causing acts for which it's going to have a status of tam, and 5 for which it's going to have a status of muad. So, says the Mishnah, habahema eina muedes, an animal is not going to have its status changed to a muad, to a, it says forewarned, but it means that it's expected that it's going to cause damage. Its default status is going to be that it causes damage. So habahema eina muedes lo ligach, for goring, which has an implication of goring with its horns. V'lo ligof, and not for pushing with its body. V'lo lishoch, and not for biting. V'lo lirbot, and not for trampling. V'lo livot, and not for kicking. Hashain, one second. Sorry. So when it's in the status of a tam, the person is going to be chayav to pay half the value of the damages, and if it was a muad, then it's going to be obligated to pay the full amount of the damages. So for these 5 actions, it can either be a tam or it can be a muad. At some point, its status can change, but these are the 5 types of actions for which an animal is either going to be assessed as a tam or as a muad. Next, says the Mishnah, Hashain muedes le'echol es hara'ui la. So when it comes to the category, of shane, which is tooth, damages which are done through an act involving teeth, so then it's only going to be actionable if it was something that would have been expected to have done with its teeth, something which it was fitting to eat. So if it chomped on something which an animal wouldn't normally eat or chomp on, then it wouldn't be subject to becoming a muad. But if it, ate an animal or something like that, which it would be expected, then damages would be actioned in that way. Haregel muades l'shaber b'derech hilucha. Damages caused by walking, by damaging things with its legs, it's only going to be actionable as a muad if it breaks things in the ordinary process of walking. V'shor hamuad, a forewarned ox, which is something that has gored, which is an animal which is gored and injured and damaged 3 times, that's going to be a muad. V'shor hamazik birshus hanizak, it has to be an animal which causes damage in the domain of the victim, but if it causes damage in its own domain, then it's not going to be actionable as a muad. V'ha'adam, and any damage done by a person is going to fall into the category of muad as well. Hazev, a wolf. V'ha'ari, and a lion. V'hadov, and a bear. V'hanamer, and a panther. V'habardalas, and a buffalo. V'hanachash, and a snake. Hare elu muadin. These have an automatic status of a muad, of something which is prone to cause damage. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer says, Bizman shehein b'nei tarbus einan muadin. That's only if they're wild. But if they were domesticated, then they are not going to be given the status of muad unless they injure 3 times, unless they damage 3 times. V'anachash muad la'olam. But a snake, however, is considered always in the category of muad, and therefore is always going to generate full compensation, full damages needing to be paid. Ma bein tam l'muad. So what's the difference between the compensation due for something in the category of tam and something in the category of muad? Ela shehatam mishalem chatzei nezek mikufa. The damages that would need to be paid but on account of injury, damage through a tam, is going to be half the value. And umuad mishalem nezek shalem min aliyah. And anything that causes damage while in the category of muad is going to incur the full amount of damages needing to be paid from the best property, from the choicest assets that the person has, the mazik has. Mazel tov, ladies and gentlemen, on completing chapter 1. And with that, let's move into chapter 2. So following along in the same pattern of what we were talking about in the last paragraph, we were dealing with a shor, we were dealing with an ox. Now the Mishnah asks, moving on to the next category, Ketzad haregel muedes. How can anything reach the category of muad on account of damage done by the regel, done by the leg, done by the hoof? So we're going to see that there's 3 methods of regel. There's 3 types of walking that an animal can do. There's normal walking. There's an animal which stops to kick something. And then in the normal course of walking, there's perhaps pebbles that may fly out on account of the terrain that it's walking over. And the pebbles that fly out end up causing damage. So the damage isn't being done by the animal itself, by its legs. It's being done through a secondary process. So let's have a look at the Mishnah. L'shaber b'derech hilucha. So damage which is caused in the course of its breaking, that is how the animal can end up with the status of muad. A behema, an animal, can be considered a muad if it's prone to damage things in the course of its walking. If it was kicking, or or pebbles were flying out underneath its feet, and it damaged vessels on account of that, then the person is only going to incur the obligation, the liability to pay half the value of the damage, because kicking is abnormal. Pebbles is a very strange way to cause damage. It's not the general, regular way of an animal behaving. So, because of that abnormality, only half damages will be incurred. Darsa ala kli ushvarato. If the animal walked on top of a kli, on top of a vessel, and broke it, the nafal al kli ushvaro, and that first kli then shattered and pieces fell on top of another vessel and caused damage to that, broke that one. Ala rishon mishalem nezek shalem. For the first vessel, because it's the normal way for an animal to trample, and it's trampled over a vessel and it's broken it and caused damage, so then the owner is going to incur full damages. But for this latter kli, which was broken on account of the shards connecting with a new vessel, then that person's only going to have to cover half of the cost of that damage. A chicken is a muad in the sense that it can be prone to cause damage just by walking and breaking objects as it goes along, and therefore the owner is going to have to pay the full value. Haya delil kashur baraglav, but if it had a bucket, a string tied to its leg, and there was some kind of bucket or some kind of kli attached to it, and as it walked, that thing was swinging around and causing damage as it was walking along. Or shahaya mahades mishaber sakelim, or the chicken was jumping about in an unusual way, and as a result of that, it was sending out pebbles which were causing damage. Those things are abnormal, and therefore mishalim chatzei nezek. The owner is only going to need to pay half the value of the damages. Mishnah base, ketzad hashein muedes. How does a tooth cause damage? So we use the word maver in the first chapter in the first Mishnah, and we're talking about essentially things which are brought about through eating. So says the Mishnah, le'echol es ha'ra'uila, things which are normal for the animal to eat. If it causes damage, then that's going to bring about the compensation. Says the Mishnah, habehema muedes le'echol peiros v'yirakos. An animal is prone to eat fruits and vegetables, and therefore, if it does so and causes damage, then the owner is going to have to pay the full value. Achla kasus or kalim, but if it eats clothing or vessels and causes damage, so it takes a bite out of someone's clothing, mishalim chatzi nezek. That's an unusual thing for it to eat, and therefore it's only going to incur half damages. Bamer devarim amurim. What are we talking about? Birshus hanizak. It's only if it happens in the domain of the victim. Aval birshus harabim patur. But if it happens in the public domain, and it was hungry, then the owner of that animal is going to be exempt. It's going to be excused from having to cover the cost of the damages. If the animal got benefit from what it was eating, and I think that's even in the public domain, yeah, then it has to pay at least for the benefit that it has derived. How do we value the payment for deriving benefit from something like this? If it ate someone's produce when it was in the street, then it has to pay the value of what it has taken benefit from. But if it was taken from the side of the street, such as a market booth or something like that, then it has to pay for what it has damaged. And if it eats from the entrance of a shop, so let's say you've got a greengrocer, outside Andrews, he's got the display stands with fruits there. So mishalei mashnenes, then the owner would pay for what the animal derived benefit from. And mitoch hachanut, if it's inside the threshold of the shop, then mishalem mashi zika. Then it has to pay the value of the damage that has been caused. All of these things, by the way, get explained in far greater detail in the Gemara. The Masechtas are very long, but we are trying to cover ground. We are trying to gain exposure to the Mishnah, and so there's going to be so many things left unanswered. But these at least kind of give us the brief overview of what the Prakim are talking about. Mishnah Gimel. We've been talking about an ox in the main, but any animal where certain behaviors are expected are also going to generate full payment. So the Mishnah says in Mishnah Gimel, Hakelev, a dog, Vagadi, a kid, a goat, Shekaftu Mirosh Hagag, which jumped off the roof, Veshibres Hakelim, and broke Kalim while doing so, Mishalem Nezek Shalem. That's a normal thing for an animal like that to do, and so it's going to incur full costs. That's what's expected of them. That they are in the category of a muad for doing that. Hakelev shenatal charara v'halach legadish. If a dog took a burning hot coal or cookie, which was boiling hot from being stuck to a coal, v'halach legadish, and it runs into a stack of grain to eat it, achala charara, and it's eating this cookie. And as a result of that, the coal which was stuck to it falls, v'hidlik hagadish. It falls into this stack of grain, this stack of wheat, whatever it is, and it lights it on fire. So the dog has caused damage on account of the fact that it was trying to do something quite normal. So al hacharara mishalem nezek shalem. He has to pay the full amount. The owner has to pay the full amount because it's damaged this cake, damaged this cookie, taken something that wasn't belonging to him. But for the value of the destroyed grain, it only has to pay half damages because that was an extension, that was a secondary damage caused by the primary damage that was caused to the cookie. Mishnah Dalad. Ezahu tam. What is a tam? The Ezahu muad. And what is a muad? So the answer, Mishnah answers muad first. Muad kol shehi'idu bo shlosha yamim. Says the first position in the Mishnah. Kol a muad is kol shehi'idu bo shlosha yamim. It's when this ox has been involved in different damage cases and witnesses have come to testify about it on 3 days. 3 different days. V'tam mishiyachazabo shlosha yamim. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So the first position, Rabbi Yehuda says that it can revert to being a tam again if it has 3 days without any court cases. Rabbi Meir says, muad shehi'udu bo shlosha pamim. It doesn't matter if it's within 3 days or if it's within 1 day where it's been involved in 3 separate court cases. If it's done damage 3 times, regardless of how far apart, I think this has happened, Rabbi Meir says this animal is going to be classified as a muad. The tam kol shehu hatinokos memashmashin bo ve'eino nogeach, and it can revert back to being a tam if children are able to be in proximity to it and to stroke it and to pet it without being at risk of the animal causing damage to those children. And Mishnah, hey, this is a longer one. Shor hamazik birshus hanizak ketzad. If an animal causes damage in the victim's property, what is the case over here? What are we talking about? So the Mishnah says, nagach, if the animal has caused damage with its horns, it's gored something, nagaf, or it's pushed, noshach, or it's bit, rovatz, or it's trampled, or boat, it's kicked. Birshus harabim, if it happened in the public domain, mishalim chatzei nezek, it's going to pay half damages. Birshus hanizak, if it happens in the victim's domain, Rabbi Tarfon omer nezek shalem. Rabbi Tarfon says full damages have to be paid. The Chachamim omrim chatzi nezek, and the Chachamim say No, also it's going to be half damages. There's no difference between public and private spaces if it's, I guess, still in this tam status. Amar lahem Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon says to the Chachamim, Umam b'makom shehekel al hashem v'al haregel b'rshus harabim. You guys are lenient when it comes to damages caused by tooth, by eating, or damages caused by regel, by feet. So if damages are caused in the public domain through one of those two categories, shehu patur, you Chachamim would say that the owner is exempt from any liability. And yet, hechmir aleihem b'rshus nizak l'shalem nezek shalem. And yet you are stringent and strict to say that if the damage occurred in a victim's property, he has to pay full damages. So in which case then, if that's your position, makom shehechmir ala keren b'rshus harabim l'shalem chatzei nezek. If you are strict on the payment for keren, something caused by damage by the horns of the animal, and that happens in the public space, and you say they have to pay chatzei nezek, eino din shenachmir aleha b'rshus nizak l'shalem nezek shalem. Is it not logical, therefore, that you should also be machmir to say that the person should have to pay full damages if it happened in the victim's property? So why are you so inconsistent? Asks Rabbi Tarfon. You've been so strict in so many other cases, and all of a sudden, when it comes to the victim's domain, you come along and you say that they only have to pay half the damage. Amrullah, so the Chachamim say back to him, Dayon laba minadin liyot kanidon. The Chachamim say that, how to translate it? They say that it's sufficient for us to reach our conclusion based on it's sufficient for us to come to the conclusion that they should have to pay half damages because we learn it out through a kol v'chomer, and as a result of learning it out from a kol v'chomer, we compare it kanidon, we compare it to its source. So mar b'rshus harabim chatzi nezek, just like a person only incurs half damages for damage caused in the public domain, af b'rshus hanizak chatzi nezek. Therefore, damages caused in the victim's domain should only generate half payment. Amar lahem, but Rabbi Tarfon says back to them, Ani lo adun keren mi keren, ani adun keren mi regel. I do not learn the halacha for one case of goring with a horn from a horn. Ani adun keren mi regel. I will also go and derive it from something else. I won't necessarily then learn my halacha if I'm not restrained to have to compare it like for like. So I'll go and I'll learn a different halacha from a different source, just like you guys are doing. In the same way that you are lenient with regards to damage caused by teeth and va'ala damage caused by feet, b'rshus harabim, in the public domain, hechmir bakeren, so then you should be strict by damage caused by goring. Makom shehechmir al hashein v'ala regel b'rshus hanizak, so then where you are strict for damage in the victim's domain caused by shein and regel, teeth and feet, does it not then make sense that you should also be strict by damage caused by keren, damage caused by a horn, by goring? Amrullah, they said back to him, the same phrase again, that it's sufficient for us to learn the halacha for the private domain from the public domain. Just like the value of damage for public domain is only half the value of the damage, so too, damage in the private domain, in the victim's domain, is also going to be valued at half the damages. Mishnah Vav, we finish off with the status of with a man. What status does a man have? So the Mishnah says, Adam muad la'olam. A man is always considered as a muad, always considered as someone who is prone to cause damage. Bein shogeg, bein mazid, bein er, bein yashen. whether they did it by accident, whether they did it on purpose, whether they did it when they were awake, or whether they did it by when they were asleep. They are always going to have to be subject to the full payments if they cause damage. If a person's eye, if he blinded another's eye, or he caused damage to vessels, mishalim nezek shalim, they're always going to have to pay the full amount if a person causes damage. And with that, we say Mazel Tov. One second, Richard. We say Mazel Tov on completing chapter 2. That's all for this week. We'll continue with chapter 3 next week. Join us for the after party on Zoom. We will take questions from our live studio audience. Take care.